Okay. Well, good evening once again. We have seen a remarkable film by Anne Glasker and Roland Wu. Please join me in giving them a round of applause for the film. And I am Professor Wayne Glasker from Rutgers University. Now, the way that this will work is that some of you have prepared questions which might be forwarded to me, and then we will deal with those questions. And of course, I will ask some questions of members of the panel. And so I think I'd like to begin with Lynn, if I may, and ask, how does it feel to be a descendant of history?
Well, you know, if I may tell you this, I have given a whole speech on it's not how I feel, but what I think about it.
Okay, well, share that with us.
Okay, because essentially, feelings are interesting,
Right.
but for me, it's more about what I've learned, what it means, what the influence of all of this was. And so therefore, for me, I think more about it, and that makes it better for me. Obviously, I feel proud, but at the same time, I think it's a serious subject, and I really like sharing thoughts about it. So when I go out and speak around the country, then I get to share all the things that I've learned when I've done my own personal research, along with just the general background of the case. And a lot about the personal lives of Dred and Harriet, which has made it especially personal to me because we've uncovered quite a few things about them that were not previously known before the 150th anniversary.
Okay, fascinating. And certainly, you point out in the film that Dred Scott, in the reenactments, is not even allowed to speak. He has no voice. And so in a sense, it is as if today you are the voice that he never had.
That's true. And I appreciate that privilege. It's absolutely a privilege to do that. There were a few things that were recorded that he said, but unlike Frederick Douglass, of whom we have very many quotes, there's very little that we know that he literally articulated, because you have to remember how much further back that was. And his words weren't as important then, and he didn't have the freedom to speak it.
That's right.
And so the few words that we have are very special, and yet I do know that from the family, and knowing how, you know, how family traits are. You know, I have an aunt who I'm sure was very much like Harriet. It's just, there's no doubt about it, and she even looks like her. And you just see that bloodline thing coming down. So if you take it in reverse, then it's like you can go back and apply that to them and see where they got that courage and tenacity from. And it's still in the bloodline today.
And we see that with you here.
Thank you.
I may say so. So Sandra, let me ask you a question. It was quite remarkable in the film that you, until the time of your father's funeral, that you had not realized the role that your grandfather had played, and that was sort of a revelation to you. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, exactly. I had never even heard of the name Wong Kim-ark, and I had been living out of the country, and my family and I, we moved back in September of 2011, and 2 months after I moved back, is it not working? Okay. Oh, is that better? Can you hear me?
That's spoken so far on stage.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I had moved back.
What we'll do is we'll just have this. We are having some audio difficulties. Our apologies. If you just pass it back.
Sure.
Well, thank you for letting us know that, because from up here,
Yes.
we sound loud to ourselves.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me? Is this working? Yes. Okay. I moved back to San Francisco in 2011, and my father passed away 2 months later. And at his funeral, there was a picture board of him honoring him, and it had pictures of him when he was young. And there was a newspaper article that was, I believe it was from 1998, and my niece had taken an Asian American Studies class, and somehow she came, or the National Archives came, found her, and they were looking for a relative of Wong Kim Ark, and somehow they found her, and there was this newspaper article up on this board, and I read it, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. I'm like, is this real? Am I reading what I'm thinking? And so I went home that night, and I think I just emailed my niece, who we don't correspond or talk on a regularly. So she says, "Oh yes, look it up, Google it. You'll find it all on the internet." So that's actually I Googled it, and I read about it, and that's how I found out about it, is on the internet. And a few months later, they were honoring him, and they invited his family members, and we went, and that's where Anne, the documentary maker, where we met, and she says, "Oh, we're looking to do a documentary on Wong Kim Ark, and we've been looking for you." And so for me, it was a process of discovery. I feel very fortunate, because it's almost like a gift for me to, through this documentary and this film, I've been able to kind of look back and go through this process of discovery.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. So Rosario, what would you want to share with this audience? What thought would you want to leave with them?
Well, what we see during the film is that we had people who had to fight for the right, or as a human being. They talk about how slaves were afraid of having their children taken away and sold somewhere else and never get the chance to see them again. We also see that immigrants, even though Chinese citizens had to prove that they were citizens in order to come back to the US, otherwise they will be detained. And it looks like that's in the past. It's no longer happening, but yet we see that immigrants are still being detained in Pennsylvania and in other parts of the US. Immigrants are detained, and we don't call it slavery. We don't call it that, but there's corporations making money every time a person is detained. They have families detained, children, and we would like to think that human rights are, that this country respects the rights of citizens, the rights of a human being, but it doesn't happen. And so I hope that from the film, people remember that things like that are still going on, people are still being detained, and that if people can get involved and trying to support immigrant rights, human rights, and make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again. I'm sure there's ways to get involved locally, and just reach out if you see an injustice going on. It takes a lot of courage. I know I was always really shy, and I was always really afraid of sharing my story, but when I knew that the chance of having my family taken away was really real, then I realized, okay, yes, I'm shy, yes, I'm usually sometimes afraid of immigration officers putting me in detention, but then at the same time, am I just gonna hide and not do anything about it? So I just hope that from the film we'll learn that we should all do a little bit or a lot to make things better in this country for all human beings.
Thank you. Elizabeth, there's so many questions I would like to ask you, since you are a lawyer and a litigator. So I guess the first question I would ask is, how did a nation that was founded on immigration begin to turn its back on immigration?
I think that's a great question, and it's not just a nation founded on immigration, which it is, but it's also a nation that was started, as we're here in Philadelphia, with the Declaration of Independence that declared that all are created equal. And, you know, we see very starkly with the Dred Scott case that the Supreme Court repudiated the promise that our nation's founders made in the Declaration of Independence. And it took amending the Constitution in the wake of that horrible decision in the Dred Scott case to make good on our founding promise that all are created equal. And I think when you see, you know, Vanessa's story, when we talk about what's happening today, what we have in the Birthright Citizenship Clause, to me, is literally the embodiment of the promise of the American dream. The idea that anyone who comes here, anyone who is born here, no matter whether your parents were rich or poor, whether they came over on the Mayflower or came over, you know, 2 weeks ago, whether they're saints or sinners, black or white, it doesn't matter. You are an American at birth and equally American as everyone else. That's what the Citizenship Clause stands for. And I think that, you know, we had that promise. It was repudiated by the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott case. It took the Reconstruction Congress and the amendment of the Constitution to bring it back. The Supreme Court, fortunately, in the Wong case, affirmed that meaning and that promise of equal citizenship, but we're still struggling with it today, and there are still, as the film shows, people who are trying to deny that promise of equality.
So if I may follow up, if we begin to chip away at the idea that all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States, and saying, well, the children of undocumented people, it wasn't intended to work that way. If we begin to chip away with that, where does that process of unraveling end?
I mean, it's a slippery slope, and it's frankly un-American. It is un-American to say that some people are going to be second class, some people are going to be less than others. The Constitution states clearly that anyone born here is a citizen as well as everyone else. Anyone is an American born equal to other Americans. And if we start chipping away at that, and there have been efforts, you know, because it is difficult. I think there was a question to Senator Lindsey Graham in there, you know, well, you want to amend the Constitution, that's hard. And so some folks who want to chip away at the birthright citizenship guarantee have said, okay, well, we'll, you know, give different birth certificates to children born to undocumented immigrant parents. But that's just going down the road towards second-class citizenship, to saying that these people are different even though they were born here and are born equally Americans. And so, you know, there are efforts to chip away at it, and I think that chips away at our core fundamental American values.
Okay. So does all, when we say all persons born, does all actually mean all?
It should mean all, and that's what the Constitution says. And that's, you know, the Supreme Court in the Wong decision went through at length, which I think is a gift to history, went through at length the reasons why you have a rule that is based on so there's sort of, you know, not to get too lawyerly and bring in some Latin, but, you know, the idea is jus soli, which is sort of law of the soil, which is distinguished from jus sanguinis, which is sort of law of the blood. And this is, again, sort of a very American idea that, you know, it's not based on your lineage or, you know, your bloodline. There's no royalty in America, but it's based on this objective idea of you're born within the jurisdiction of the United States. And so all does mean all. That's what the Constitution says, and that's what the Supreme Court says. But there are some people who, you know, as Vanessa said, I don't know what their motivation is. I don't know what their motivation is either. But it's contrary to the Constitution and contrary to our values.
Okay, do we have a question from the audience? Okay, well, yes, sir, all the way in the back? Yes.
Well, I tweeted out this question, saying I understand, Elizabeth, what you're saying about, you know, all being all. But I'm sitting here biting my lips. Now, with those two cases, the Dred Scott and also the Wong part, the fact that their parents was brought here, some of them might be against their will.
1868.
Because they need to justify all those citizens, all those kids that were born here due to slavery. So but we're in a situation where, now, Mr. Rosario, I appreciate your case because your family sacrificed and you live here, you pay your dues, and your kids were born here, and I totally appreciate that because I'm an immigrant myself. So I have an issue with all being all at this 14th Amendment right now.
Yes, and actually, I'm really used to these types of comments, and people telling me, "Oh, you have your daughter, and she's eventually gonna petition for you." And so when I came to the U.S., I was not thinking of, "Oh, I'm going to have a daughter, and I'm going to have citizenship." Actually, when you're facing really bad situations, and we don't. I mean, even though I'm not a U.S. citizen, I feel like I have a lot of privilege now. I see children having to escape gang violence, they have to escape cartel violence, they have to escape so many things. They're not thinking about, oh, I want citizenship. They're thinking, I want to be able to survive. I want to be able to have a life where I can be able to eat. It's really, really basic things that we are looking for. When I was a child, I was only 13 years old when I came here, but I was able to understand the reason why I was coming here. I was not looking for citizenship. I was looking for being able to afford food, that's really basic. And now I do see like people getting really upset, and I just don't really get it, especially because if you have a heart that doesn't really allow you to see someone who's starving, and you don't feel like, oh, I should be able to share what I have, then if you don't have that, if you don't have it in your heart, if you just don't feel it, then that's fine. I can't argue, and that's totally fine. But
I feel your case. I just don't like some of the wealthy taking advantage of the amendment of the United States. I mean, our Constitution. I just like, especially from other countries. Now, all those trials and tribulations, I appreciate. Now, I know you deserve it, and a lot of people who want to escape war-torn area, poverty, or crime, or we have refugees. People deserve that. I'm just saying that on the opposite extreme of the 14th Amendment, where a lot of wealthies are coming here, taking advantage of our system, that I have a problem with. That's all. Your case is, everybody's case struggle is fine.
Next, we have in case you have not noticed, we have some young people here tonight. There's an entire row of students close to the back, and they have sent a question. And the question is, and any member of the panel can respond to this, the question is, if the Native Americans were here first, then shouldn't others be considered immigrants too? Who'd like to respond to that? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the reason that I'm taking the mic, I'm not even sure what I'm going to tell you yet, is that I was just sharing with them before we came out that the first time I saw my great-grandmother on my mother's side was in her coffin, and she was 100% Cherokee Indian, which I'd been told, but I thought she had been dead many years ago. And so I also, and I was in college, so I started learning more about Native Americans, and apparently you all must know something about it too, or you would not have asked the question. But for sure, there are people who have said we are all immigrants in terms of the Native American. And what happened to them was highly unfair. It was disastrous, actually. And the fact that they were here first. This is a very deep and complicated subject. You know, we're not going to get into all of it tonight. But in essence, we are all immigrants. And that's what it's all about, is that we are all immigrants. Only the Native Americans were here first, technically. And so there needs to be a lot of compassion, understanding, and so forth. It's the same as with Dred Scott, when they were saying all men are created equal, and yet they said that Dred Scott and all Africans and their descendants were property, and they hit under the Fifth Amendment clause. to make that case in the Dred Scott decision. So there's a lot of duplicity out there, and history is not always pretty, and it's not always what we thought it was. But we're in a day and a time where we can talk about it, and we need to do that, and we're doing that. And so it's good that you asked that question, and I would say the answer is yes.
Okay, well, John Smith didn't have papers, and neither did the Pilgrims. They were all undocumented. Okay, we have another question, which I guess I will direct to Rosario. So I will read the question. What happens to child citizens when undocumented parents are deported?
Well, it depends. But the government doesn't really think about that when they deport the parents. If they have a family member who can take care of them, then they will have to go with that family member. Otherwise, I guess foster care will be the other option. But yeah.
Okay. Do we have another question? Okay. And I see your hand, so why don't you go ahead? Thank you.
I know your daughter is a citizen. Why is she never applied for citizenship or your parents?
So my parents, well, my mom tried to get a visa, but the immigration laws are very difficult, and especially for Mexicans, it's very hard to get a visa to come to the U.S. So we tried that, and if you don't have money, then it's usually that's what's going to get you the visa to be able to come to the U.S. So they tried, but they were denied. And no, I can't, even though my daughter is a citizen. So first she will have to be 21, but then the thing is, when I came to the U.S., I didn't have a visa, so that makes me inadmissible to the U.S., and so that doesn't allow me to become a legal permanent resident. So even though she's a citizen, that's not an option for me as of now.
Okay, Elizabeth, did you want to add to that?
I think it's important to recognize that the immigration legal system is extraordinarily complicated, and especially for people who came here when they were young, unless you take certain actions at the very beginning, it's very easy to miss deadlines, to then have sort of this irreversible situation that you can't really do anything about. And it's compounded by the fact that, as we all know from watching television, and you have a right to an attorney even if you can't afford one in the criminal justice system, but in the immigration system you don't. And so a lot of people get caught in the immigration system and cannot afford a lawyer. Maybe they spend their life savings on a lawyer who simply isn't very good and misses deadlines or files the wrong paperwork, and then you are basically stuck. Because in a lot of cases, even if you wanted to reapply, you have to leave the country and go back to your country of origin. And especially for a lot of people who are facing violence or difficult situations in their country of origin, that's just not a realistic possibility for them. So, the legal system in immigration is extraordinarily complicated, made even worse by the fact that, a lot of people who find themselves in that system don't speak the language, they don't have counsel, and so it makes it even worse, especially for young people. And one of the things that this current administration is trying to do, which is controversial in some quarters, is to note the fact that someone asked what happens to parents of children who are citizens. And one of the things that the administration has tried to do is, we only have resources to deport about, 800,000 people a year, and there are millions of people undocumented in the United States. And so what the administration has said is, why don't we use those resources to go after people who represent a potential threat to security or who have a criminal background, and not go after first people who are hardworking in the country with children who may be citizens, and that's sort of this deferred action program that the administration has been trying to implement. And, you know, I think no matter what your feelings on immigration, and whether you think that everyone should be, you know, removed who doesn't have papers, or you have a more compassionate approach, that just simply, to me, makes sense. But it is something that's very controversial, is working through the court system right now.
Okay, do anyone else want to add to that?
I do, thank you. One of my thoughts is that my husband and I were talking about something else, a totally different subject. And he said, you know, when there's really a problem, we have so many resources here, and we're not talking about money, we're talking about intellectual resources. Why is it that we don't use those resources to solve problems? You know, we used to solve problems in this country. Now we just report on them. And if we had perhaps even a think tank group that would come together, it doesn't have to be the government, it could be people in this room, and solve the problem. You know, once you get to the point where she's saying we just needed food, or there were gangs and the children were trying to get away. We were talking earlier today about a 4-year-old having to stand in front of a judge because he was illegal, but a 4-year-old who doesn't speak English standing in front of a judge without an attorney makes no sense to me. But the process requires that. So the process and the system are quite broken, and I think that we need to ourselves, you know, like get up, you know, like the Minutemen, and do something and stop waiting on somebody else to do it. It could be fixed. We're just not applying ourselves. That's my personal opinion. But it's easy to point the finger, but it's not always something that people want to do to get up and actually solve a problem.
Okay, so where does this issue now stand with the House Judiciary Committee?
So one of the things that was pointed out in the film is that year after year, we have seen bills introduced in the House, and there was just a hearing 2 weeks ago in the House Judiciary Committee seeking ways to end or erode the guarantee of birthright citizenship in the Constitution. And fortunately, none of these bills have really gone anywhere, but they continue to be introduced. And we see politicians, even at the level of presidential candidates, raise the possibility of trying to remove the guarantee of birthright citizenship. So, you know, even though it's enshrined in the Constitution, even though we have Supreme Court precedent in the Wong Kim Ark case that says this is what the Constitution means, there are still people who, as of 2 weeks ago even, are trying to get rid of that constitutional guarantee.
And, you know, it seems that, you know, we do have a process in this country. You know, everyone who has studied civics understands that if you want to amend the Constitution, you bring forward a bill, it needs a 2/3 vote in both houses of the Congress, it must be ratified by 3/4 of the states. It is an issue of public opinion. And so if the process is being abused, there is a way to correct that, but somehow it seems that we're trying to sort of short-circuit the process. And if the majority or a 3/4 majority wanted to end birthright citizenship, then that could be done. But evidently, there are not the votes there to do it. But we keep getting the red meat every election season.
Yeah, and you know, in the wake of the Civil War and after the Dred Scott ruling, it was intentional that the Reconstruction Congress drafted a constitutional amendment that said birthright citizenship is a guarantee. It was intentional that they wouldn't allow the dignity of citizenship to be apportioned out based on, you know, change in Congress, based on political whims. They wanted to make it difficult for this country to, again, remove the dignity of citizenship from a group of people. And so the idea that it could just be taken away by legislation was something that was actually talked about by the drafters of the 14th Amendment, and they sought to ward that off by writing it into the Constitution and making it much more difficult to take that away from a group of people ever again.
Okay, and 3/4 of the states ratified that. Okay, do we have another question? I see a hand here. Yes, go ahead.
I would like to bring up the either case or question of Margaret Randall, who I believe was a journalist during the 1970s, who did a lot of writing about the war or the different wars
re-entry back into the country? Elizabeth, are you familiar with that?
So the Supreme Court has held that the government can't revoke someone's citizenship. It can only be revoked through an individual renouncing that. That, of course, is different from questions of, although I guess if you're a citizen, you couldn't be barred re-entry. So I don't know the specifics of that case, but the court has held that you can't, as a punishment, remove someone's citizenship. It has to be renounced by the individual. I don't recall off the top of my head.
The reason I'm bringing this up is that this is a fairly recent thing that an American citizen has been, or that the government was under President Reagan, I believe, tried to prevent her because of her journalistic activism from coming back from Central America.
I mean, sometimes it can be complicated because, there could be certain consequences that are threatened against the person if they do re-enter. But the court has said that, when it comes to citizenship, which is something that is thought to be so such a part of inherent dignity at birth, that is something that must be renounced by the individual. But that was a fairly recent case. I don't know if it was prior to that.
Okay, there's a hand there in the glasses. Yes, right there.
No. So that's an example of consequences perhaps attaching to someone returning to the United States, but they're not actually going to revoke his citizenship. It's just a question of whether he would want to re-enter the United States and face potential consequences. I do not believe so. But I think for him, he would not want to return because of the criminal liability that might attach if he does return.
Okay, I see a hand here. Go ahead.
I think a lot of the reason that people are up in arms right now about birthright citizenship has to do with the cases of buses of people being brought in, pregnant women wanting to have children here, and then them going immediately on welfare and basically taxing our system, with this, of people coming in over the border immediately, and the babies having to be cared for and going through all sorts of medical, and then their parents automatically being welcomed in the United States to care for these babies. And again, how the welfare, the education system, and they go on in articles about how much expense are we incurring as a nation because of this.
Yes, there are a lot of people that are coming to the U.S. And once again, if you, at least if I had a baby and I know that I'm not as a mother, and I know that I need to care for my baby, I will do anything to care for my baby and to make sure that they have a better future. And then about asking for welfare, I think it's very funny when people tell me that. They tell me, you don't pay taxes because you're undocumented, and then you're on welfare. And then I read about corporations being able to travel to my country and use their resources, and then we don't have the same freedom as human beings. And then also just doing some research about how corporations here are the ones that are not paying taxes. Undocumented people are probably, for sure, we pay more taxes than corporations. But yet, when we point the fingers, they point the fingers at us. Like, I read something like General Electric paid like $10 of taxes, and they make much more money than what I make. And I see people getting angry at me, but they don't get angry at the corporations. And then welfare. Recently, the U.S. had to bail the banks, and I don't know. I mean, I just don't see why we are allowing corporations to go to travel freely, and then as a consequence, people have to migrate to get better jobs. And it's really easy to just oh, it's your fault. You immigrants are creating all of this. And yeah, because the corporations are the ones who who move the media, and they can control what's going out there. And so it's good to just like always question, okay, this is the story you're hearing, pregnant women coming to the US because they want to be on welfare. And people can assume that about me. And actually, I've been able to work with lots of people who, at the beginning, they had that assumption, and then they get to meet the people, not actually the stories. And you realize that we're just human beings trying to have a better life, not explode the country or anything.
Okay, we are now at 5 minutes to 8, and so I'd like to ask each of the panelists if they have a closing remark that they'd like to share. And who'd like to begin?
Okay, my point is pretty much what I said earlier. We have a very broken system. And my story is the beginning of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment overturned the Dred Scott decision. So a lot of people come to me and they say, oh, we need to get that done. Well, it was done with that amendment. And when you read the Constitution carefully, sometimes they don't even, well, it never uses the word slavery. It uses phrases that refer to it. So subsequently, that is where the 14th Amendment came from. And we have a lot of human issues, human compassion issues, human suffering issues today. And I don't have the answer, but I do know that the fact that people are concerned that people coming in across the unguarded borders are potential terrorists. You know, you can't blame people for being concerned about that. And yet there probably is a solution. And I still say that we need to put our heads together and make it work, because I don't remember the numbers. We have millions and millions of illegal immigrants here. And they're not going to just go home. But yet, is there a point where we can stop the leak and turn it around so that people can come in? And the process does not have to take, you know, it used to take 6 months, they say, now 16 to 18, and then it's years. If you miss a deadline and you can't apply, these are horrible things, you know. And the more I look at this, which is not my actual area of expertise, I just see a massive confusion and something that we need to fix. And, you know, I'm willing to be a part of that process.
Hi, I'd just like to say, well, you know, one thing I learned through this process is all the fight and the struggles my ancestors and as many others, what they had to do for me to be here, for all of us to be here. You know, America, we're all immigrants, and to remember that, and yeah, to have compassion for people. And everybody's story is different. This is a very controversial, immigration is a very controversial topic, and you know, some people have very strong opinions, but this is America, and we've all come from different places. And my second thing I want to say is research your family history and look into it, and go back and look at your lineage and genealogy, because you never know what you might find.
I think, you know, one thing that sitting here in the National Constitution Center and being up on the stage with sort of, you know, the human embodiment of historical moments in our constitutional history is to remember that, you know, we are talking about a consistent and constant struggle to make our country the America that we all want it to be, and that the promise of the American founding of equality and freedom and liberty and dignity. And that's something that we are all a part of. And it's something that you read in the words of the Constitution and their majestic language. And, you know, those of us who are lawyers go into court and argue about them in reams and reams of paper. But it's a story of individual Americans, of Dred and Harriet Scott, of Wong who had the courage to stand up in court and go through what it took in order to fight to have their rights vindicated. And sometimes that took, in the case of the Scotts, an eventual amendment to the Constitution by the country after the wake of the Civil War. Sometimes it's an individual making their way through the court system and making a difference. But we are all part of that story, and we owe a great debt to our ancestors. And I think we owe it to them to do what we can to live up to the constitutional promise that is particularly embodied in the 14th Amendment. And I find it a privilege to be up here and to be a part of this film, which I think brings that story to life for so many people.
Can we just all thank Ann one more time for doing this for us? Thank you, Ann. And thank you to the National Constitution Center as well for hosting us. Thank you.
And once again, I want to thank all of you. We have had a spirited discussion, but it has been civil. And we also want to thank Tanea Neal from the Constitution Center. Thank you for organizing this program.